At the end of this week's Parashat Noach, we get introduced to Avraham Avinu's family, his lineage, his genealogy, where he comes from. And we get introduced to his father, Terach Avi Avraham. He's going to give birth to three sons, Avraham, Nahor, and Haran. And we're going to learn a little bit about Avraham's brothers. Nahor ultimately is going to become the grandfather of Rivka. He's going to be the great-grandfather of Rachel and Leah. Haran himself is pretty famous. He's going to be the brother that according to the Midrash, is going to follow Avraham into the fiery furnace, die on Kiddush Hashem. But he himself is going to have three kids, one of them being Milcah, who's going to marry Nahor, be the grandmother of Rivka. He's going to have Lot, and we all know the story about Lot later on in the Torah. And then he's also going to give birth to a daughter named Yiscah, and Yiscah, according to Rashi, is actually Sarah Imenu. So we have very important people, the family of Avraham Avinu. Now comes along the Rama Mipano. I was listening to a shiur by Rabbi Feiner. He said unbelievable stuff. Says the Rama Mipano that if you take the word te'ena, fig, te'ena is taf aleph nun hey. Te'ena comes from it stands for Terach, Avraham, Nahor, and Haran. So the whole family. Terach, Avraham's father, Aleph, Avraham, Nun, his brother Nahor, Hey, his brother Haran. They are Te'ena because they're coming to be the tikkun of the Te'ena. Like, what in the world is it talking about? Okay, so we've spoken many times in the past about the concept of the Etz Hadat, the original sin. Last week's parasha, Bereshit, Adam and Hava, they eat from the Etz Hadat, Tovara, the sin of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. What was that fruit? So we know the famous Mahlokut. We've spoken about it in the past a lot. Rabbi Khan speaks about it a lot. We spoke about the Sefer's Vayvana Yotzei Eden, who actually relates the fruits to the different holidays of the year. So according to the Midrash, it's an etrog, and we actually give many divrei Torah about the etrog corresponding to the Etz Hadat on Sukkot. According to the Gemara, it's three other fruits. Opinion number one is the Hita. We've related that to Pesach. Opinion number two is that it's the Geffen, and some try to relate that maybe to the holiday of Purim. Others take the wheat and the Geffen and they relate it to Shabbat and the meals that we have every single week, and there's a certain kind of tikkun happening there. And then the third fruit, according to the Gemara, is the Te'ena, is the fig. So Rabbi Feiner asked a great question. He says, when it comes to the wheat and when it comes to the grapes, so we have holidays, we have Shabbatot that are tikkuns, and we're going to eat the fruit. And when it comes to the etrog, if you go into the Midrash, we have Sukkot, and the skulav eating the etrog after Sukkot. So we have ourselves like times when we eat these fruits, and there's different ways to make a tikkun. And we've given many, many divrei Torah of maybe how the tikkun happens, how it happens on Yom Tov, how it happens on Shabbat. But he says when it comes to the te'ena, when it comes to the fig, where's the tikkun? Where we don't. There's no holiday where we eat figs. On Rosh Hashanah we have a lot of different fruits that we eat for the simanim. The modern day minhagim. We're gonna eat dates. We're gonna eat rimonim. We're gonna eat apples and honey. But we're never eating figs. What about the figs? Now I know some of you are going to tell me you're halachic people. You're worried about the bugs in the figs. Okay, I hear, but te'ena is one of like the major 7 species. Like it's a very important fruit. But at the same time, we don't find a holiday connected to it. We don't find a mitzvah to eat it, to wave it, to shake it. There's no mitzvah. Now we did mention in the past that Vayvana Yotzei Eden has a way of connecting it to Chanukah and the Greeks, and then the fig leaves on the side. But that's already like a little more of a stretch because there's no actual mitzvah to ever take the fruit or any part of the fruit or use the fruit. So says Rav Feiner, oh, you know why? Do you know why there's no mitzvah to take the te'ena? It's because of this hint of the Rama Mipano, because the Rama Mipano says, what's this idea of te'ena being Terach, Avraham, Nahor, and Haran? Te'ena stands for Avraham and his family, because they're going to be the tikkun for the Etz Hadat. So we don't have to make a tikkun with the grapes, and with grapes and wheat, we still have to make a tikkun. It didn't happen yet. But you don't have to make a tikkun with the figs, with the te'ena, because it already happened, as we see from the Rama Mipano, is discussing on the hint in our parasha of the family being the te'ena. Now, we mentioned in the past that Tikkunei Zohar, the Ben Ish Chai brings it down as well, that what was the Etz Hadat, which is it this fruit, is it that fruit, and according to the Kabbalah, it actually might be all the fruits, or there's a different aspect of the sin and each of the holidays, each of the Shabbatot, or each of these fruits are gonna metaken that aspect of the sin. So it might have been one special fruit with all of these attributes, and the idea is we're gonna try to make a tikkun in different attributes. So the attribute of the wheat and the attribute of the geffen, we still have to fix, and we do that with the Yom Tovs and Shabbat. But the attribute of the te'ena, that part of the Etz Hadat, so that part is already metukan by the hint in our parasha of Avram's family being the te'ena. So the question now is, though, like, okay, how does this tikkun happen? How is it that Avraham, Terach, and Nahor, Haran, how are they doing mitaken, the etzadah? Like what? Okay, very nice. They make the tikkun. Very nice hint. The question is why and how? So, Rafiner spoke a little bit about the Mesirut Nefesh, that Avraham made his whole life and the tests, and Avraham makes big tikkunim, and his brother Haran, who follows him into the fiery furnace, even though he didn't have the full level of emunah of Avraham Avinu, he still dies on Kiddush Hashem. So there's a little bit, maybe the Kiddush Hashem aspect, they're willing to die to be against Avodah Zarah. So there is some kind of tikkun happening there, but it still leaves us with Nahor, it still leaves us with his father Terach, like really, well, what is the actual... How does it work? Actually, one sefer that I read said it's not clear how the tikkun works. There's a tikkun here, but it's not so clear. But then I was thinking, and lanut dati, it's a little bit complicated. How in the world can you say that Avraham Avinu's family was metakin, the te'ena aspect? What is the te'ena aspect? So according to the Gemara, the etz hadat is the te'ena, is because once they ate from the etz hadat, they realized they were naked. They realized there was erva, that there's nakedness. So what do? They cover their nakedness with the te'ena. They cover themselves up with the fig leaves. So the fig kind of corresponds to an aspect of the sin that has to deal with sexual immorality, with nakedness, with erva. So saying to myself, I don't understand. How in the world do we learn, maybe Avraham and Nahor are willing to die in Kiddush Hashem. Avraham and Haran are willing to die in Kiddush Hashem. They're willing to jump into fiery furnaces. They're willing to fight against the Avodah Zarah of their father, Terach. But where in the world do we have this concept that they're trying to make tikkunim when it comes to sexual immorality or to nakedness, to erva? How does that correspond? Where is the tikkun happening over there? And to drive the question home a little bit further, we know, according to the simple pshat, Avraham Avinu's father wasn't the most righteous guy, at least at the beginning of his life. And he was selling Avodah Zarah, he was an Oved Avodah Zarah, he sold Avodah Zarah, he was into idolatry. But according to the more mystical explanations of Terach was a Bo'el Nida, that Avraham Avinu was a Ben Nida himself. There was certain sexual sin taking place even in the birth of Avraham Avinu. So to say that we have a tikkun of Te'ena, which symbolizes the covering up of the erva, how in the world do we find that in the case of Terach? How in the world can you say of all aspects of the Etz Hadat and all the different parts, other parts, when it comes to wheat, when it comes to geffen, we've had different aspects of what kind of tikkun we're trying to make and what the sin was all about. But if the sin is coming, if the aspect of the sin over here is the erva, how in the world are we going to say that Terach and where do we even see Avram's brothers? Where are they really involved in this tikkun? So I started looking up the question, trying to find somebody who might answer the question. So I saw some interesting ideas. It says in Sefer Vayaged Yaakov that he first off starts off and says that Avraham was the Ikar Tikkun. So if there's a Tikkun for Te'ena, the main player in the Tikkun, while Avraham's brothers and his father might be somewhat involved in the Tikkun, Avraham is the main guy in the Tikkun. Okay, so I was thinking, we know Avraham is a tzaddik, but where's the Tikkun when it comes into the area of nakedness? So I was thinking, maybe we know there's a famous story of Avraham and his wife Sarah, that we see that Avraham is so loving to his wife. He's pitching her tent first, and then we know that even in the areas of nakedness and beauty and physical beauty, external beauty, Avraham was a little bit clueless, or I don't know clueless, but Rashi brings down that until they went down to Mitzrayim, where there was major sexual immorality, Avraham never noticed how beautiful his wife was in a physical sense, how beautiful Sarai Imenu was, and so the standard explanation is because they were so tsanua, because they were so focused on the spiritual and their neshamot, that the external sexual beauty was not something that was so apparent, that wasn't the life they were trying to live. Only when they get closer to Mitzrayim and the environment does Avram realize, okay, now I got to protect my wife, I got to hide her because I'm worried we're going to a place where things aren't going to be so good. But we see that they lived a life of more tzniut, and maybe there's a tikkun right there alone of Avraham Avinu and the head from the aspect of the erva. But in the Sefer Vayaged Yaakov, he takes it in a different angle, because he says that, we're going to have the holy women and the holy family are going to come. Let's talk about making a holy family. Actually, once I read that, there's also levels of yibum taking place here that maybe also could talk about bringing people together in a proper holy kind of way, because when Haran dies, so Haran he has two daughters. He has Sarah, who's Rashi says Yiskas Sarah, and he has Milcah. Nahor is going to do Yibum and marry Milcah. Avraham Avinu is going to marry Sarah. So we have over here this concept, okay, maybe we're having marriages, we're having healthy family units, and maybe that in a certain sense is a tikkun of a tena, I was thinking. But the Vayaged Yaakov says, let's just see who came out of them. Just that alone could be the big tikkun. So he says, Avraham Avinu, we know is Avraham Avinu, the Jewish people. He says his brother Nahor is going to be the grandfather of Rivka, because he's going to marry Milcah, Haran's daughter. They're going to give birth to Betuel. Betuel is going to give birth to Rivka. And then not only is Nahor going to be the grandfather of Rivka, he's going to be the great-grandfather of Rachel Leah. all the holy women that are kind of come out of the Jewish people and the mothers, they're going to come all through the Nahor line, as well as through marrying the Haran's daughter line. So we have Haran as well. He's going to have the tikkun because his daughter Sarah is going to marry Avraham. His other daughter Milcah is going to marry Nahor, and he's going to give birth to Lot. And what do we know about Lot? Lot eventually, through his daughters, we're going to get to David HaMelech, Ruth HaMoaviyah, and David HaMelech. So Mashiach is going to come from that line as well. So the ultimate tikkun is going to come, and maybe not directly in their generation, but through their kids, their grandkids, and their great-great-grandkids, and that's going to be the tikkun maybe of the te'ena in these people. But ultimately, when we come back to terach, what about terach? What's the tikkun? How is terach involved? So ultimately, one sefer says, yeah, but Terach is the father of all these people. So if Avraham is a zachut, and Nahor is a zachut, and Haran is a zachut, so ultimately, so is Terach, because Terach is the father of all those. He's going to be the one that's going to create the lineage that's going to make all the fixing. But okay, and also he can do teshuvah at the end of his life. We had a whole Dvar Torah last year that even though right now it sounds like from Rashi at the end of our parasha, Terach might be a Rasha right now, at least the Rashi in the brackets. When we're going to get to Rashi towards the end of Avraham Avinu's life, we're going to learn in the Rashi there, we had a whole Dvar Torah about it, that Terach does teshuvah and is going to ultimately end up righteous and die righteous. So maybe there is a zechut of Terach in doing teshuvah. But ultimately, I don't really get it, because okay, even if Terach did teshuvah, and even if ultimately he's the father of all these other righteous people, but to say that he's making the tikkun of a te'ena, even with doing teshuvah, we don't understand how did the teshuvah work in detail. Like, how does that related to the te'ena? Like, it's not clear that okay, he messed up and he fixed himself, but that fixing of himself was so great to make the tikkun of the te'ena. Okay, maybe, but we were lacking the information. There's no haser min hasefer. How do we know that Terach is actually involved? So I saw in a sefer called Likutim Pardes. The Likutim Pardes, he basically is bothered by the same question, and he says that it can't be. He says it can't be, and he says not only did Terach not make the tikkun, he says Terach himself was not only was not mitaken, he was mekalkel. He actually made things a lot worse, to the point that kabbalistically he's going to have to come back. He has this whole Kabbalah about Gilgulim, reincarnations, and Terach is going to come back as Eiyov and have to go to all the Yisurim, all the afflictions to try to mitaken, because even though he did maybe the teshuvah at the end of his life, in the beginning part over here, there wasn't enough positive over here. He's going to have to come back as a Gilgul. Actually, as a side point, I saw in a different sefer also brings down in this Kabbalistic ideas of Gilgulim, of reincarnations, that Avraham jumps into the fiery furnace, made a big tikkun against the Avodah Zarah. He says, but Nahor never did, so he has to come back as Hor. We have the same letters Hor in the without the Nun, but we have ourselves Nahor. He's going to die in Kiddush Hashem for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to stop the Avodah Zarah of the golden calf. And he says also Haran is going to come back as Aharon with the olive, who's also going to be involved with the Egel. And he says that Aharon's actually going to make a mistake, and he should have died also right after Hor. But he says, oh, do I have to die? I was already Haran originally, who jumped into the fiery furnace in the previous Gilgul. But ultimately it wasn't fully correct, and that's why Aaron's children, Nadav and Abihu, are going to die while Aaron is still alive, while the father is still alive, just like Haran died but while Terach was still alive. So cool Kabbalistic ideas that maybe should open up bigger mystical concepts of what's really going on in the world. But let's get back to us. Okay, so back to this Likutei HaPardes. So Likutim HaPardes. So he says that Terach really didn't make a tikkun. He's part of the Kilkul. And he said, if you want a hint to the fact that it's part of the Kilkul, so he goes to the very end of the parasha to the words of Rashi. Okay. So says Rashi, this is the very last pasuk in the parasha, after going through the lineage of Avraham, and they all start making their trip. Avraham and his family start going to Eretz Canaan, but they don't make it. They get to the city of Haran with a het, and then it says, Vayu yemei Terach hamesh shanim v'matayim shana. Terach was 205 years old. Vayamot Terach beHaran, and Terach dies in the city of Haran. So Rashi on this pasuk starts doing a bunch of math, and he goes, wait a second, it's not so clear that Terach just died right now. Well, actually, Terach's going to live for like many, many more decades, and like 60 more years, Shishim Shana, more than 60 years. And Avram's going to go out. Avram's going to leave at 75 years old and go to the land of Israel, and Terach is still alive. So he asks, so why is the Torah telling us now about the death of Terach before Avram leaves? He's going to live for many more decades. So he says, why? So that everybody shouldn't say that Avraham wasn't Mekayem Kibura Va'em. So therefore, he abandoned he abandoned his father at an old age, and he went on his own. Instead, the Torah basically says that Terach died right now, And so that way we wouldn't realize that Avram's leaving, because Avram's supposed to leave because God told him to. Then there's an interesting Rashi in brackets that says another explanation could be that he died now because the Rasha'im are called dead. So this is kind of like saying the Terach might be a Rasha, although again we said last year that there's a much later Rashi that's going to say that he does Teshuvah at the end of his life. And then the last Rashi says as follows, that where did he die? He died Beharan. So he says if you look at the word Haran in the Torah, Hanun Hafucha, there's a backwards nun. Okay, we spoke about the nun, the backwards nuns a lot back when we got to Parshat Ba'alotecha. Says Rashi, here's another place in the Torah where there's a backwards nun. Now, according to most of the explanations, the backward nun is actually in the word Haran. The nun, the last letter, the nun sofit, in the word Haran will be backwards. There are some other old Sepharim and certain Sepharim that maybe there's a backwards bracket at the end, but it seems that most are learning here that the nun itself is backwards. Now, interestingly enough, if we open up our Sifrei Torah, there is no backwards nun. Meaning today's regular tradition is there's no backwards nun. I saw one posek said he made it to a city and he saw one with the backwards nun. But and actually, if you open up the Beit Yosef of Yosef Karo on Yoradea Siman Reish Ayin Hey, at the end of the Siman over there, he says that in the case of the backwards nuns, if you don't do it, the Sefer Torah is still kasher. So it sounds like the Beit Yosef, that his Torahs had this backwards nun. It also sounds like from the Ramah, that the Ramah also had the backwards nun, but it also sounds like halachically, and they quote poskim, that it's not me'akev. If the nun is not backwards, it's still kosher. And the tradition today is that the nuns are not backwards. But according to Rashi, and Rashi's Torah, it sounds like had a backwards nun in the word Haran, that Terach dies in Haran, backwards nun. Why the backwards nun? So says Rashi, Lamar lecha, to tell you, Ad Avraham, that until Avraham comes along, Haron Afshel Makom, that Hashem was angry. There was anger when it came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the omnipresent, Ba'olam, at the world. Hashem was angry at the world. But then Avraham comes, and now the nun gets turned around, everything gets changed over, and now things are going to be good again. So says this Sefer Likutim Pardes. He says, okay, so why the backwards nun over here? He says, we have a famous Dvar Torah in Parshat Ba'alotecha. The rabbis taught us over there. Rashi says over there that why is there a backwards nun? To tell you that part of the Torah is in the wrong place. And for those that listen to my Shar Nun Divrei Torah, we've had many of them in the past. This is one of the classic answers, is that that section of the Torah should be somewhere different. So he says beautifully over here that, we just said, this is in the wrong place, because we know Avram's father is going to die much later. So the Torah is putting his death earlier. So the backwards nun is symbolizing that the chronology is not correct right now. Okay, so that is the answer of the Sefer. I actually saw the Chidah argues on this approach, because he says Rashi didn't say that here. Rashi only waits the Ba'alotecha to give that Gemara about things being in the wrong place. So it must be there's a different reason for the backwards nun. But if you go back to this Likutei Pardes, he says there's another reason. Because the backwards nun is symbolizing that Terach wasn't correct. That Terach was messing up. The backwards nun, there's no nun in Ashrei because it symbolizes Nefilah, it symbolizes falling. Terach was messing things up. And if you actually take the word Terach and mix around the letters, make it all backwards and mess around with it, you get the word Retach, you get Ratach, that Hashem got angry. We just said that Hashem was angry at the world. Terach backwards, or Terach, you play around with the letters, you turn things around. What do you have? You have anger, because Hashem is angry in the world. It's only when Avraham comes along that the world is going to be happy again. And actually, they say there's a famous tradition that the first 2,000 years of the world was tohu, was destruction. Everything was backwards to begin with. But then comes Avraham Avinu, and we have 2,000 years of Torah, and then finally we got the last 2,000 years of Yamot HaMashiach. But Avraham is going to turn that over, and the backwards nun is symbolizing the end of an era, the start of a very new era. Thus, this little letter, this little switch comes along with Rabbeinu Behaye on this part. Seems like he had the backwards nun as well. And he's saying this is part of the deeper hints of the Torah, of the 50 gates of Binah, of wisdom, of the Sha'ar Nuns, basically saying this is hinting to very big, deep ideas in just a little switch of a letter, a little different angle of a letter. So as we're saying now, the backwards nun is symbolizing that there was 2,000 years, the years up until Terach, where things were tohu, they were backwards, but then Avraham is going to make that change. We're going to move in a proper direction. Sadly, though, it's going to go up until the next backwards nun, which is going to be Behi bin Sa'aron, Ba'alotecha, which we spoke about, where the Jewish people take another turn towards the negative, when they're going to be stuck in the desert for another 40 years and not enter Eretz Yisrael in the times of Mashiach right away. We're going to have to go through a much longer exile till we get till today. But Hashem, we should be zocheh to turn that nun back one more time and go in the right direction to Yamot HaMashiach. Shabbat Shalom.